This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self. Hey everyone, it's Rosie. I am so excited about this conversation that you're about to listen to with Christine Dolliver and myself. She is such a powerhouse and such a phenomenal example of what is possible when you put really, really good intentionality into your goals, your culture, truly living your purpose and your values, and developing people and developing leaders. She is the director of people strategy for Dealers Wholesale. They are in the construction industry and space, so not a typically, I don't know, maybe warm and fuzzy one we think about when it comes to culture and development. And they are really flipping this on its head. What I love about how they view things is they really view that you do not have to choose between being a people focused and a results focused company. They are not mutually exclusive. And Dealers Wholesale is really embodying that. And as a result of investing in their people and investing in their culture, more that, I don't know, soft side of business, they are actually seeing results and they are way ahead of their BHOGs, their big, hairy, audacious goals. They are just on a rockin' trajectory. And you're going to hear her talk more about that. And the other thing that they do that's just as near and dear to our heart is they realize that you do not need to have a title to show up as a leader. And you're going to want to listen for how they view that in their company and how they determine what does it mean for someone to show up as a leader in their company, as well as some of the results they have and how they're going about acquisitions. There's just lots of really, really powerful, impactful nuggets in this that I think you're going to take a lot away from. All right, Christine, I am super excited to have this geek out session with you and to hear about all the awesome things you're doing, because I think it's going to be helpful and inspiring for so many businesses in so many different industries. So thank you for being here.
I am very excited to be here, Rosie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things I want to do as a jumping off point, obviously the show is called Show Up as a Leader, and we view leadership as fundamentally being about us maximizing our positive impact on the world by becoming our best fully authentic self and supporting those around us to break past barriers and step into their greatness. And I know that that's a mouthful, but we've always said that leadership never has been and never will be about a title or role. And one of the things when we first met and we're talking about this that I wrote down that I was like, oh my God, you're speaking my love language, is how you really look at what you do is you don't need to have a title to show up as a leader. Can you speak more to that of like what that means to you and how that looks at your organization?
Sure. So Dealers Wholesale, we run on EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system. And so every day when we come to work, it is very clear to us what our long-term vision is, what our core values are, what our mission is, and what we're great at. And we view anyone as a leader here who is going to show up and embody those core values and work toward that vision every day. So you do not have to carry a title to influence those around you and create accountability by being a high performer.
Well, and so often I think, one, it speaks to you have to have done the work to have clarity of your purpose and clarity of your values and have them be operationalized. So they're not just a bumper sticker or they're not just words on a website, but like everybody knows these are the core concrete behaviors that are our values in action. And this is the filter that I use for how I approach situations, how I show up, et cetera. So I love that. And so let's talk about, having some of those goals. I know that when we talked, you have some pretty big BHOGs. People don't know what that is. Jim Collins-esque, go back, decades ago, big, hairy, audacious goal. Can you talk to us about what some of your BHOGs are and kind of the why behind them? And then we're going to talk about what you're doing to meet them, because you guys have been doing some really, really incredible work. And talk a little about your company too, because it's in an industry that usually gets overlooked. We usually think about a lot of this culture stuff and values for more knowledge worker type rather than trades and blue collar. And so I would just love for you to talk more about the journey you've been on, because I think it's super awesome and super relevant.
So Dealers Wholesale, we are a construction company. We have two different divisions. So we've got a commercial and multifamily division that specializes in doors, frames, and hardware. And we have a residential division that specializes in indoor and outdoor fireplaces and outdoor kitchens. So yeah, a lot of our workforce, they spend all day, every day out in the field, delivering, installing, and servicing those products for our customers. So our CEO, Jimmy Rayford, he joined us in January of 2020, which is a wild time to join a company. And he came in with the vision that a company did not have to choose between being people-focused or results-focused. You can do both. And in fact, one impacts the other. And so he hired me maybe 6 months after that. And we have been on this journey to create a culture that attracts and retains the best talent in our industry. So our BHAG, which we set in 2020 for 2030, it's a 10-year goal, is to be both one of the fastest growing companies in our industry, as well as have 90% people retention everywhere that we have an office. And one of our big strategies for growth has been and will be acquisition. So that includes offices that we don't even have yet or know where they'll be.
To level set for people who aren't familiar with your industry, first of all, 90% retention is good in any industry, but isn't the average in construction, the average turnover more like 40%?
Yeah, that's correct. So it's very, very normal to have a 60% retention rate. But I can tell you, as I sit here, our trailing 12-month retention rate is about 88% right now. So we're getting close.
So you wanted to be there by 2030, but here you are, right? Only a couple of years in. That's phenomenal that you have almost an 88% retention rate. And so let's talk about, I love that it's not either or, it's both and, because so often people think that focusing on the people side of things is fluffy and whatever, and what's the point? But they're not mutually exclusive. And so I love that you're doing that. So talk to us about what are some of the things that you've then been doing on this journey. I know like 2023 was a big focus for you. Talk about what are some of the things that you've been doing and what you've experienced as a result.
So we've all heard the statistic that people don't leave a company, they leave a boss, right? So late 2022, Jimmy and I had a conversation about these initiatives and how we can get intentional about these things. And it occurred to us that the number one thing that we can do to really impact retention is have great leaders. We want to have the best players in the field and the best coaches in the sidelines, is how we put it to them. And so we started to really, really invest in our leaders in a substantial way. So we put together a curriculum in 2023 that was mostly grounded in the fundamentals of EOS. How to know you have a right person, how to know that you have the right person in the right seat, how to have a great quarterly conversation and talk about career path goals and all these things. But we also did things like Patrick Lenciani's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And Dealers Wholesale was kind enough to get me Crucial Conversation certified. So I was able to facilitate crucial conversations for all of our leaders. And this journey was probably, I think, 9 sessions over the course of 12 months. We skipped a few months that we knew were going to be very busy for our leaders. And what was extremely cool was at the end of this, we asked them for feedback, just how did this go? How can we improve this? What can we do better next time? And a lot of the feedback it wasn't things like, wow, this content really changed my life or made me a better leader. And that would be great feedback, but it came back more like our leadership team said they were going to invest in us and they did it. And that engagement of our frontline management team, I think that's where we're seeing all of the results show up, is they feel more engaged, they feel more included, they feel invested in by their senior leaders, and they feel closer to the results and how we make decisions and all of these things. So they're able to take that back to their teams in a more intentional way. And I think that we're seeing such great retention because our leaders are more engaged than they've ever been.
Gosh, there's so much in that I love and I want to unpack, but I want to circle back to something that you said that I think is critical that gets overlooked a lot so I was with one of our clients that we talk a lot about in our book, and they're in like chemical manufacturing distribution. So again, not, a lot of people out, driving and doing stuff, et cetera. And what's really interesting is they've also been in this space of not mutual exclusivity. Like we started working with them in 2018. We're going to focus on our culture, which includes, having a structure around culture ambassadors and how do we keep our values and our
purpose and our why, et cetera, alive. We're going to focus on developing our leaders. We're going to do targeted intervention isn't the right word, but targeted support in areas that are struggling and people that are struggling. We're really going to invest back in our people in an ongoing, sustainable way. And what they found is that they had said that since 2010 to 2018, they financially were fine, but they were flat. And they've had a steady growth and even had 2 record years in spite of the pandemic. And so I think that, and we're going to talk about more of your results too, besides you're already at 88% retention almost. But I think it's this counterintuitive. We think we don't have the time, we don't have the money. How are we going to do this? Our people aren't going to care. But what we hear, and I wonder if this is what you heard, is that these people are like, again, I was a good fill in the blank. I'm a good salesperson. I was a good truck driver. I was a good warehouse worker, whatever it is. And then you get promoted into management. And so often we don't fully equip them of what does it actually mean to lead other people and to hold both of those that seem like they're opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're not. And when you invest in them, not only does it help them be more effective so that they can, facilitate the culture you want to have, but it helps them feel seen and valued because they do feel skipped over. They do feel like, well, okay, you're asking me to do this job. And who wants to come to work and feel like you suck or feel like you're not meeting standards or whatnot? And I hear so often from leaders in all industries that are more of that supervisor manager level that they are fried and burnt out because they either feel disconnected or they said they feel like they're punching bags or caught in the middle between employees and executive management. And I'm seeing that group of people from a leadership standpoint burning out. And if you're burnt out as a manager or you're stressed and on overload, that's going to come across to your people. So with that, I think I love that your leaders are, expressing that they feel like seen and heard and invested in, and that you're seeing that translate into others. Are you getting them, besides asking them how they feel, are you doing anything to then actually find out, well, what's the impact? Like, are you getting feedback from their teams, or how are you knowing beyond, hey, they feel more engaged, that this is actually doing what you want it to do, that the investment is fully worth it?
So you were talking about results not being mutually exclusive to, engagement and the things that we consider fluffy. And the way that we see it showing up is the results last year. Last year, we did more revenue than we've ever done in any single year in the history of our 60-year business. And leadership classes that we put together, we made them mandatory because it's the first thing to get backburnered when you get busy. When we sent these out and made the announcement and said they were going to be mandatory, this meant that they had to plan months in advance to be able to get their selves there. So they found the time in the midst of the busiest that they have ever been to do it, and still achieved record revenue, still achieved incredible quality, still achieved incredible on-time delivery. Our customer satisfaction scores are extremely high. I think those are the measurables where you see engagement really show up. Because what you said, nobody wants to go to work and feel like they suck. They want to be a part of a winning team. So when you take that time, you invest in your people, you make them feel seen, heard, and valued, and you give them the tools to succeed so that they can get the results, that further engages them. It's just like this momentum cycle of motivating results lead to action, lead to the behavior, lead to results, lead to the action.
I love that on so many levels. And, I have a question that I'm curious about, because there's a lot of debate about, do you make something mandatory or not, and how people show up when something's mandatory. That can be very, I'm doing this to check the box so I don't get in trouble, but I'm not engaged, I'm not invested. There a lot of times can be a lot of pushback for mandatory, other than, compliance and stuff that people know they have to do. But there can be there's varying thoughts around mandatory. So obviously you chose to make it mandatory. What was the initial reaction? And was there any pushback? And if there was, how did you help them lean into it?
My theory was that if we make it mandatory, nobody likes to hear that something is mandatory. Like, oh my gosh, I have to go do this. Even the people who would have done it electively, no one wants to be told it's mandatory. But my theory was, if they go through a couple of these, they'll begin to see the value. And that's exactly what happened. Like the people that between you and I expected to be kind of disengaged and during these are some of the people who went on to give us some of the strongest feedback. Like, I'm so glad we went through this. And they are people who it's a blue collar world where we work. And so talking about vulnerability and authenticity and this kind of stuff can feel very, very fluffy and unnecessary. Like, hey, we're just here to do the job. Can we just go do our jobs, please? And by the end of it, those people are the ones who are like, I didn't realize how badly I needed this. And in many cases, they're the ones you're talking about. They were the best installer, so now they're the install manager. And they were the best service techs, now they're the service tech manager. And all of those kinds of people who had been in the role but not been given the investment or the tools to truly step into the leadership half of it. They could train people how to do the job extremely well, but did they know how to hold people accountable or drive results through a group? That's the kind of stuff that they realized, oh my gosh, I actually really needed this.
Well, I love it. Yeah, because formal, again, going back to everybody can show up as a leader. And I love that you look at it. If people are showing up and, having accountability within themselves and embodying our values and all that stuff in your world, that's showing up as a leader. And I 100% agree. And for people who have formal people leadership responsibilities where they are responsible for the performance of other people and the well-being of other people, and they have people within their span of care, there is fundamentally a different skill set. And I always say it's not for everybody. But it requires you to shift that mindset of, oh, I was the installer and that's where my comfort zone is. And so then maybe I want to jump in and do it for them or whatever it might be, right? Rather than it's the give somebody a fish sandwich rather than teach them how to fish type of a thing could be it. Or maybe I don't know how to have these crucial conversations and these difficult conversations. And so I either avoid them. What crucial learning says is we either resort to silence or verbal violence, right? So it's like we tend to do one of those two that is not helpful in any way, shape, or form. And so we've got to work on our mindsets and everything, which I think is just super critical. And I love that you had oh, I needed this, because so often what we see is whether it's mandatory or not or whatnot, when people have the development, whether it's a coaching session or whether it is one of, our developmental program workshop sessions or whatever on their calendar, you'll hear this, oh my God, I'm so busy. I don't have time for this or whatever. And then when they give themselves permission of, okay, I'm going to take this time to focus on me, inevitably you hear, I'm so glad I did this. I didn't realize how much I needed this. Man, I needed this. This was super helpful, etc. So I love that. I love that you just kind of like, hey, if you do it well, which I know you do, if you do it well, you can help to overcome some of that initial, hey, you have to be here. If it's not done well. And I would say, I love that you brought up authenticity and vulnerability, because if we're not fundamentally equipping leaders to lean into vulnerability, reframe their narrative that it's a weakness, and show up more as a more authentic version of themselves, we're going to keep having environments of self-protection and armor. And then you have safety mistakes, you have other mistakes. Like there's a whole host, especially like in industries like yours, you can't have psychological safety and physical safety when you have leaders who do not know how to model vulnerability, and when you have leaders who do not know how to create courageous cultures where other people can also show up more authentically.
Now what we're seeing, so we're moving into the second phase of this. So last year we taught on kind of leadership fundamentals. So now in this second year, we are going deeper dive into more advanced leadership topics, things like emotional intelligence and leading with influence and these sort of things. And it's not mandatory. We said this year, it's optional. We're going to do it once a quarter instead of as often as we did it last year. And we encourage you to come, but we know it's not for everyone. And if you don't want to come, you don't have to come. And we're still having a great turnout every single time.
So let's talk about so you got the leadership part. And then what else? 'Cause I know you're also doing some things to be really intentional about your culture that you feel are contributing to you already having like tremendous progress towards your BHOG that, wasn't even until 2030, and you're already almost meeting it in 2024.
Well, one of the things we're doing, so coming out of the 2023 leadership training program, we then asked those leaders to nominate individuals on their team that they either, one, think are high performers who need to be retained and engaged in an intentional way, or two, they see as future potential leaders at our company, either because they have expressed a desire to go that route or because they're a natural leader. You just see people around them gravitate in that way. And so now we have another way to touch our frontline people. So the ones who have been nominated and are in this class, they're able to take that and go back to their respective departments and say, here's what I learned, here's what this is like, you got to try to do this next year, and that sort of thing. And they're from all different departments throughout the organization. I explained that we have a couple of different divisions. We also have a branch up in Wisconsin, an access control company that we acquired a while back. So we've got remote folks in there, just all kinds of people who wouldn't normally interact that are now able to engage with one another, bounce ideas off each other. We'll go out afterward and have like a happy hour so they can build some bonds that they might not have otherwise had. So that's been one way that we're doing this. And it's twofold. It's engagement, it's retention, it's also preparation for the next generation of leadership at Dealers Wholesale. Other things that we're doing, we are a member of the True You community. So True You is a culture community in Indianapolis that provides in-person, online, virtual, all kinds of awesome training platforms that can range from anything from leadership to finance to stress and burnout to parenting. Like they really get into all of it. And so everyone in our organization has access to that. And there's hundreds and hundreds of courses that they can go in and utilize. We put people through formal leadership programs as well. We'll put 1 or 2 a year through their advanced leadership program that True You offers. Apart from that, I think a lot of it is just about the authentic leadership. You always hear that culture starts at the top, and Jimmy is a wonderfully approachable leader. He's the kind of person who will get up and say, here's what I'm struggling with personally, just so you all know I'm human. It gives the rest of the organization permission to do the same. And so we've seen a lot of that kind of ripple effect in these last few years.
I love that because it does set the tone. And I think you're doing something though that is really important, because here's what we see is like with some of our clients, the CEO, has done a lot of work on themselves and does model vulnerability and what it means to be an authentic leader, and that actually is a source of strength, et cetera. And despite that, you still have, more frontline supervisors and managers that are like, oh, hell no, right? Like it doesn't matter that they're inadvertently giving permission. They're like, oh, heck no. And so I love that you're equipping them, because yeah, culture does start at the top. But the thing that I've learned over the years is it might start there, but it's not experienced there. Culture is experienced at the local team level, and every interaction any employee has with any person in formal leadership reinforces that person's belief about what, whether they're valued and what the culture is, and if it's a lived experience or it's a bunch of BS and it's, a bumper sticker or whatever. But particularly, as you said, like we know that people tend to quit leaders, not their companies. So if my direct leader is not modeling vulnerability, if my direct leader does not know how to leverage emotional intelligence, does not know how to have crucial conversations with me, does not know how to hold the vision, then that's where culture is experienced, and that's where it gets eroded. And there can be a huge disconnect, especially as you grow and get bigger and bigger. There can be a huge disconnect between the most senior leaders and the entry level employees and everything in between. And the people who have those formal leadership roles, regardless of level, are the critical fulcrum and pivot point, because they have such an influence over the entire employee experience by how they show up with people each and every day. And so I love that you all are caring for that.
Well, and the other piece of it is Jimmy's not doing this from his office all day, every day. Like when we were several years back having quality issues in our production department, instead of delegating that work to somebody out on the floor, Jimmy made himself acting operations leader for that division. And so Jimmy was out there on the floor directing traffic. He was willing to go out there and get his hands dirty. And so I think a lot of people felt he was very accessible, and his willingness to do the work and not just delegate the work, I think earned him a ton of respect. And so that leading by example, not just on things like authenticity and vulnerability, but in rolling up his sleeves and doing the work side by side, I think went an extremely long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some places where it's not feasible for whether it's a CEO or COO to know that level of detail, but they can still show up and be present and be like, okay, and I'm going to talk to the people and learn what's going on and see if I can add some additional lens of what might be an issue versus sitting back. I love that. The other thing that you said that I thought was really important, you were talking about your other location that you acquired is, the connections that people make. And one of the things, especially for people who are listening that do have people in multiple locations, right? Or if you are primarily a virtual remote company like that we are, there is value of bringing people together in person periodically. Because yes, you can build relationships over Zoom and Teams, but it really is not the same as in person. And here's what we hear from our clients, that when they pull like their leaders together and do some kind of summit, or they bring their employees together and do some sort of, workshop and development, that it does build those relationships. And I always say that in the absence of data, our brains fill it in with story. And so if you've only emailed with somebody, or you've only ever talked with them on the phone, or even to some extent, if you've only ever Zoomed with them, or done Microsoft Teams with them, you only know this much of them, and it's hard to hate people close up. So when you get to know them and see them as a human being, there is less propensity to fill in with crappy stories when they make a mistake, when they're not as responsive. And so we are seeing more organizations getting back to realizing the value of, we need to budget for whatever it looks like for our company, bringing people together in an intentional way for that very reason. And are we creating space in the agenda, whatever we're bringing them together for, to foster those connections for all the reasons that you talked about, so that we're working together as one company versus a bunch of siloed sub companies. And especially when you're going to be going through a bunch of acquisitions, I think that becomes even more critical, because there's a lot of angst around that when one company is getting absorbed into another.
Well, and we're very, very intentional about this. I go up to Wisconsin at least once every quarter. So does our CFO, so does our CEO, and not all together either. We go up there with an intention. For me, it's usually something around leadership development, or, we do annual talent processes where we go through like the 9-box exercise and risk and impact assessments. And I will go and do those things in person as often as I can to make sure that we do have that relationship, because HR in particular can be easily vilified over email.
Yeah, HR is usually positioned as the bad guy. I mean, it's the reality, which isn't fair. But again, if there's not those types of relationships, it's hard. Then you're viewed as the compliance, or the only when I'm in trouble type of thing, not the I'm a useful partner in your journey.
But instead, I'm going up there and, petting the sales manager's dog that he brings into the office. Yeah. No, they keep lots of dogs up there. It's lots of fun. It's also more incentive to visit.
Here we go. I love that. I love that. So I'm curious. So since you have a plan of acquisition, can you talk a little bit about how, or what is the thought behind how are you going to maintain the culture that you are creating and nurturing, and the things you're putting in place when you start to acquire other companies? Because again, this is where things tend to fall apart. And you've put such good effort, and you've got these amazing goals, and you're having such amazing progress. I would love if you talk a little bit about what you're planning for anyway, or what you're currently doing.
It helps that we have our vision already in place. We already know our core values. We already know exactly what we stand for. And so it starts by, we will not acquire a company who is not culturally compatible with Dealers Wholesale. We've looked at companies before where they came back from a visit and they were like, that was an absolute nightmare. It doesn't matter what the financials look like, we're not doing it. So we have this lens through which we can filter those decisions. If they don't have core values, because a lot of smaller companies, they're not quite there yet, does their culture align with what our core values are? Do their leaders agree with what our core values are? Are they operating in a way that shows us that? And we have that filter up front before we even go into it. And then the other thing is, you've got to re-onboard them in a human way. Like when we took ClearPath Connections into our family, we drove up there. I sat down with every single person in that organization, and I talked them through their new benefits package. I talked them through PTO and how it works, and took a few minutes to get to know them and let them get to know me, so that I wasn't just the HR from the big corporate entity that owns us now. I'm Christine. And so when I go up there, I have those relationships. I can ask like, hey, how did your son's truck meet go? And that sort of stuff. So that goes a long way. And the other thing is, we are very intentional about bringing them into the other processes we already do. So the leaders up there are part of our leadership training. Their emerging leaders up there are part of the emerging leader training. They're going through the same talent processes that we go through. And because they didn't have that structure before, They are hungry for it. They're grateful for it. They've never seen it before. And it's helping them gain traction in their organization as well. So it's the intentionality, the inclusivity, the compatibility from a core value perspective is how we will continue to foster and retain that culture.
I love that. I love the intentionality you're putting behind it. And I think there are a lot of companies that have some intention going into it, but then I think going back to when push comes to shove, they sometimes will veer away from that spidey sense of, nope, there is an alignment, or they will ignore the signs of whatever because either they're hungry for growth. Again, they're looking mutually exclusively, because the human impact, if you acquire a company that is not culturally aligned, is disastrous. And I think we all know it. And so I love that, there's a quote that we use in some of the work we do from Walt Disney that's, it's easy to make decisions when you know what your values are. On an individual level, it's easy. I say easy. I mean, you do have a clear filter, but sometimes you have to have really tough discussions and stuff to stand firm in your values. Like, that's the courageous thing to do, to veer off of it. I think, Simon Sinek calls it the discipline of how, for a reason. It takes discipline, it takes courage, but that's what grounds us. So I love that you are modeling that. I love that you're leveraging that. Kudos to you. It's such a great, and I think in an industry that doesn't typically do that, right? I mean, let's just be honest. It's not, construction's not typically warm and fuzzy, right?
Yeah. And it's helpful that I went through a really bad acquisition once. Like, I was on the receiving end of, we were this awesome company with such a great culture and did really great work. And then, we were bought by some huge nameless, faceless corporate entity who treated everyone there as a number, and everything became rules and discipline and compliance. And I watched that culture just go right down the drain. And it was, exactly what you described before, of so-and-so in HR at the corporate office that I've never met, that's now turning down my proposal or my idea or my request for a new headcount or whatever it is. And it's like, they're the villain. They immediately became the villain. And so, having been on the receiving end of that, when we started talking about acquisition, I was like, I have to be there.
I am not. And yeah, no one else is going to go through what I went through. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Salvio Partners years ago I started as like a side hustle, like we're talking early 2000s, put it on hold because I was at a consulting firm. And the impetus behind resurrecting it honestly was, I worked for a smaller regional firm. It wasn't quite like the normal acquisition. There's a large company that was doing a smaller, I don't know, like they were trying to get into like middle market or whatever. And so, yes, they were acquired. And it wasn't like, a faceless person in HR. But I think what happened is all of the people in leadership started drinking the Kool-Aid, and it was the assimilation. And they used to have a culture where innovation and challenging the status quo and speaking up and all of those things were rewarded and valued. And suddenly it was a liability. And so if you didn't suddenly go into a box and start speaking corporate speak and started being labeled as difficult, then that was a problem. With that, I spoke up or whatever. I suddenly became a huge liability, where they used to celebrate me, when I was getting all these accolades. And all of a sudden, so it was like the pendulum went from being my boss's golden child to, quite frankly, shit on the bottom of his shoe. And it was awful. And so I was like, no one should have to go through this. And so, yeah, it is amazing of how much there can be such goodness in scalability and growth and expanding when mergers and acquisitions are done in a human, thoughtful way. And they're so disastrous when they're not. So thank you for modeling that. And just, I think, and reminding us of that importance, because we work with a lot of groups that are working on acquisitions, have been acquired, have it as a potential growth strategy. And it matters how you go about it, big time.
We offered them that reassurance too. Like, we are not here to disrupt the culture that you have built. You have great people, you have awesome retention. You're doing the right stuff. Like, please keep doing the right stuff, and we'll add what we can add to make it even better, but we will not detract. And that's exactly what I went through. Was I got to watch the culture that I helped build get flushed down the toilet. And that was heartbreaking and tragic. And then to feel powerless to do anything about it. And yeah, I was like, peace out.
Bye. So you've been so graciously sharing, and we've been having this theme going about your CEO being authentic and vulnerable, and you've been sharing. And so I want to shift gears a little bit, because speaking of the challenges that some people can have with being authentic and vulnerable. One of the things that I'm obsessed with, besides having more human workplaces, is the normalizing the messiness of what it actually means to be human. And in all of the work we do, what I've learned is it is a normal human experience, no matter how much work we've done on ourselves, no matter, how successful, however you define that you are in your life, no matter how much love and care you have in your life, that we all can revert back to this like 10-year-old version of ourselves and tell ourselves stories that are self-limiting and can keep us safe and small. And so what I would love if you'd be willing to share, Christine, is what is a self-limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes? And when it shows up, how do you move beyond it so that you can show up as a leader in your life and have the impact you want to have?
Well, I think probably a lot of your listeners will really relate to this. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 3 years, I have sat on the senior leadership team, the executive team for a huge, well, not a huge company, but a significant company. And my quote unquote peers are all 10 to 15 plus years older than me. And there are times that I am sitting at that table going, when are they going to realize I have no freaking clue what I'm doing? That imposter syndrome. If I don't have all of the answers, then I don't belong here. And it has taken so much intentionality and like positive self-talk and like literally brainwashing myself to say, no, you earned this seat at the table. No, you earned this seat at the table. And not like somebody somewhere made a mistake and somehow I'm sitting here. And any minute now, they're going to realize that I am still that 10-year-old that's just like sitting there in my light up shoes, like swinging my legs under the chair, just like thinking about my next ice cream cone. I don't know.
Oh my God, I love that so much.
With that, the imposter syndrome, that self-limiting belief of I don't belong here. And in fact, I have put in an incredible amount of work to get to where I am at the time that I did.
I love that. I'm laughing because it is so common to me. It's one that I hear over and over and over. And as you were saying, it reminds me of one of the things that Brene Brown regularly says is stop walking around looking for evidence that you don't belong, because you will always find it. And so we have to anchor of I've earned this. I've worked hard. I don't have to be perfect. I love that you have your different mantras and you're almost trying to fix your own mindset and hypnotize yourself, if you will. So that's awesome, because you do belong. Obviously, you're doing amazing things. So imposter syndrome be gone. Easier said than done, but I love that you have practices for that. All right, are you ready for quick questions?
Yeah, bring it on.
All righty, fill in the blank. Living authentically is
Hard.
I echo that. Okay, when the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do?
Drink a cup of coffee and do it anyway.
Coffee is courage juice. I like it. That's awesome. What is something people would be surprised to know about you?
I hate ketchup.
Such a random. I love it.
I don't know. And mayonnaise. I'm me and condiments, mustard. We don't get along. It's very controversial. I've started a lot of arguments with this.
All right. What is your favorite go-to movie?
Well, I'm a really, really big fan of the Hunger Games trilogy. It's either going to be that, or I also rewatch Star Wars over and over.
All right. What is your go-to song?
There's a song called Green Lights by an artist named Cruella. It's a really good, just like hype song.
I love a good hype song. What is something that you can't live without?
I can't say coffee twice. Oxygen.
That's a very practical answer. I like it.
I struggled.
That's all right. What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
My son, he's got such a big personality. He somehow has already mastered sarcasm. He's the most stubborn, intelligent, quirky, funny kid.
And what are you grateful for right now?
I am grateful. Well, honestly, I'm grateful for this opportunity. I had a goal this year of trying to get at least 2 speaking engagements on the book, and this is number 2.
Oh,
So
that's awesome.
I'm grateful that Nikki connected us, and I'm grateful to just have the opportunity.
Yeah, well, I'm super grateful for the connection as well in the conversation. So I have one closing question then for you. Christine, if you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that would create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, what would that be?
Have the hard conversations. Don't sit there and wait for a problem to resolve itself. Don't wait until it's reached critical mass. Just practice radical candor. If you care about your people, you will challenge them directly. Have the hard conversations.
Could not agree with that more. That very well said. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for modeling what's possible when you put some intention into your culture and leadership and the difference that you're making for your employees and your industry. And this has been an awesome conversation. I'm really, really grateful.
Thank you so much, Rosie.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.